Have you ever pulled up to the river and wondered, where the heck are all the fish? And even if you know where those fish are, how do you get a fly in front of their face so they'll snack on it? You've got all these complex currents you got to deal with. You've got to get the flies to the right depth, and heaven knows I've got my fair share of stickfish. Today, you're going to learn how to avoid snagging bottom, how to put your flies in front of fish, how to make them look like the real thing, and dramatically increase your chances of catching your fish of a lifetime.
大家好，我是杰罗姆。本期内容来自油管飞钓频道著名博主 Ventures Fly Co， 他将教会你如何读水，如何把若虫送进鱼最容易开口的那层水域。
There are two key things you've got to remember if you want to consistently and successfully catch fish on nymphs. You've got to get your flies in the right kind of water, and you've got to get them to the right depth. Let's start with finding the right kind of water. You might have heard the term reading water before, and that's the skill we're discussing. All it means is that you're able to look at a piece of water and identify places where fish are likely to hang out. In our case, we're looking for water that's moving at about walking speed, and if you want to get all sciencey about it and smart and high IQ, that's water that's moving about 1 to 2 feet per second. Fish are most commonly found in this kind of water because they want to expend the least amount of energy for the most amount of food possible. The reason fish hold in this kind of water is because it has a ton of aquatic insects. It's the right speed to create enough oxygen for aquatic insects to thrive, and that is really why fish love this kind of water. All right, enough science. This walking speed water most commonly shows up in riffles, runs, and pockets. Now, you've probably heard those terms before, but let's define them to make sure we're all on the same page. Riffles are shallow, quick-moving pieces of water. Fish generally hold in riffles from mid-spring through early fall when aquatic insect activity is at its peak. During winter, you won't often find fish in riffles. Runs are a bit deeper than riffles without that classic surface disturbance that you see in a riffle. Fish tend to hang out in runs year-round. Pockets are formed when there's an obstruction in the river, often a rock. This forces all the water around the obstruction, which creates a pocket of calm water right behind it. Fish hang out in pockets from spring through fall, though summer is often the best time to fish pocket water. Now, if it sounds like I just shouted Greek at you and you got no clue what I'm talking about with riffles and pockets and runs, then I want to draw your attention to one thing that connects all those different types of water, and that's called a seam. Seams happen when you get fast water meeting slow water. Fish love seams so much because they can hang out in that calmer water, but then that fast water is bringing them a steady buffet of food, so the fish can dart out into the fast water, eat, and then go back into the seam, hang out, and not spend too much energy. Because again, fish want to expend the least amount of energy for the most amount of food possible. Now that you've got all this information, we're ready to move on to the second part of successfully nymphing, and that is getting your flies to the right depth. So we know where to cast our flies, but how deep do we get them in the water? Well, we've done some painstaking research. Alex traveled to the wilds of Kamchatka. I went down to Antarctica. We scuba dived multiple rivers. We put this stuff through our analyzer, and what we came up with is this fancy-dancy concept called the strike zone. We did not come up with the strike zone, but I like my version of history better. The strike zone just refers to where in the water column, vertically, the fish are hanging out and eating at any given time. So if the fish are up eating dry flies and having a great time, the strike zone is going to be that top third of the water column. They're looking up and actively eating very high in the water column. If they're not eating dry flies and they're down eating nymphs, then that strike zone moves and it's going to be that bottom third of the water column. When we're nymphing, our strike zone is generally going to be that bottom third of the water column, so that's what we're going to be referring to when we say strike zone for the rest of this video. The reason fish hang out so deep in the water isn't because they're trying to play hard to get like Barbara back in high school. No, they're hanging out down there because the water's moving a little bit slower at the bottom of the river compared to up on the surface. The riverbed causes a lot of friction, which means the water down on the bottom is going to be moving slower than any of the water up on the surface. Since that water lower down is moving slower, fish have to expend less energy to eat, so that's why they're going to hang out there. You have a few different options to get your flies down deep, but the two that we're going to focus on are the simplest and, in our opinion, the most effective. The first option is to use big, heavy flies tied with beads. Tungsten is the best because it sinks a lot quicker than brass. The second is to use split shot. Big, heavy flies or split shot is how you sink your flies. You control the depth with your strike indicator, and we're going to dive into that more in just a minute. Of those two options for getting my flies down deep, I personally prefer to just use heavy flies. I don't like putting split shot on my leader because it's kind of a pain in the butt to cast and you lose a bit of sensitivity so you don't feel every single bite. Sometimes though, it's unavoidable and you have to use split shot because the water is so fast and so deep that that's the only real way to get those flies deep enough. So you know you've got to get your flies down deep. They need to be in that strike zone, the bottom third of the water column. But that strike zone is going to be a different depth if you're fishing in a hole that's 5 feet deep versus one that's 3 feet deep. And as nice as it would be if every hole on the river was a uniform depth and we could just set our rig and forget it all day, that's not the case. So you've got to remember a little acronym we came up with here, ABA, always be adjusting. As you move from spot to spot on the river, you'll have to adjust your rig to make sure your flies are staying in front of fish and you're giving yourself the best opportunity possible to put a few in the net.